Matt Levi Investigates, brought to you in the public interest without commercial interruption by the Hawaii Community Foundation, supporter of the Susanna Wesley Community Center and other essential service providers. Hawaiian Electric, caring for our communities for over a century. The Hawaii Government Employees Association, working together for Hawaii. And by Central Pacific Bank, where people like banking.
I was burned by meth pipes, cigarettes, all types of stuff. I was shot last year. That was my last time, and trafficking was last year of April 1st, 2020, or 2021 when I was 20 years old. They're willing to let you just die unless you make them real good money.
He put a gun in my mouth and he was telling me that if I say another word, he has no problem and won't hesitate to just shoot.
What went through your mind when he did that?
I want my mom. I just wanted to come home.
The stories are difficult to hear and painful for these survivors to relive, but they must be heard if change is to be made. Sex trafficking is a global tragedy from which Hawaii has not been spared. As you watch tonight, we hope you believe, as we do, that no matter what ethnicity or environment he or she comes from, any Hawaii child in danger belongs to all of us. Young victims can be recruited from anywhere: schools, malls, homeless camps, and online at sites like Facebook and Tinder. One popular site, Backpage, has now been shut down by the FBI. Targeted children are often runaways with histories of abuse or neglect who are desperately looking for emotional security. Traffickers are skilled in spotting them, but promises of friendship, love, and protection are quickly replaced by a cruel betrayal, and the child is tricked into the nightmare of sexual slavery.
Me and started to get closer, and that's when we eventually started dating. And at the time, me and mom weren't close, so he was like the only person at the time that I got attention from. And that's kind of how I fell in love with him, so you can say, because I was getting so much attention from him.
Joni Chun is Executive Director of the Susanna Wesley Community Center, which offers critically needed case management services to victims of all forms of human trafficking, with a focus on women and children.
The problem is not necessarily what people think, that it's happening on a street corner, street walking, kids being snatched by a white van. It's happening more frequently or in our neighborhoods that people just don't know about.
Sex trafficking is a financial crime, and because it's a financial crime, it knows no bounds. Traffickers will target anyone.
Sex trafficking doesn't discriminate against race, gender, your background, who your parents are, what family you're from. And so bringing awareness to this issue is so vital so that we are prepared to respond, not if it happens, but when it happens.
Calais Grant and coordinator Amanda Leonard staff the nationally recognized Hawaii Missing Child Center, part of the State Attorney General's office. They work with police and others to locate and recover runaways and identify children at risk of sexual exploitation.
So every time I hear this type of situation, all it does is continue to add fuel to my energy to work harder to prevent it, work harder to intervene, to locate and recover those children that are still out there in Hawaii and beyond.
Kavai told us that from an early age, she was a victim of sexual abuse by a family member, and after her parents divorced, she bounced between households. In her teenage years, she rebelled and became involved with drinking and drugs. She would sneak out of the house and skip school.
The most vulnerable are those who are targets. Most vulnerable meaning they're running from home. Maybe it's unstable. Maybe there's a lot of arguments, violence happening, and running to something. Maybe they're running to someone who is claiming to be a boyfriend, but then really they're luring them into that lifestyle.
At 16, Kavai ran away from her father's home into the waiting arms of her new boyfriend, her soon-to-be sex trafficker. His motive gradually became clear.
He would bring up that if I sleep with this person, then he would be able to get free weed. If you love me, you would do it. And that's when it first started going on.
How old were you?
I just turned 16 at this time.
Angela says her story also begins with sexual abuse when she was very young. Her father was in prison. She said her mother was physically abusive. Angela became a runaway and involved with drugs. She was placed in foster care but ran from there and soon found a gang of other runaways who were under the control of a trafficker.
I thought that they were my friends, but they were already into that lifestyle. I had met the wrong person. And then I had went to LA, and basically from there, this person had led me into a trap with another person.
And he sold you for sex?
Yes.
How old were you when you were first trafficked for sex?
13.
Soon after that, she became pregnant by her trafficker.
And I gave birth at 14, so when I came to Hawaii, I was about 5.5 months pregnant.
Angela says her mother took the child and disappeared.
When she did take my child from me, I was suffering with suicidal attempts and all types of stuff because me and my son were separated. So when I went back to shelters, I ended up running away from the shelters, and I went back into the streets of Hawaii.
Angela eventually connected with case managers at Susanna Wesley, but did not stay with the program.
Research shows that it takes about 7 attempts of help to finally leave that life. So we have to be persevering, having a persevering spirit in being there, walking with them when they fall back.
The state of these vulnerable children, this is when they meet people that do not have good intent, that want to involve them in criminal activity, whether it's drugs, alcohol, whether it's sexual exploitation.
For Calais Grant at the Missing Child Center, there is a chilling personal history to her fight against sexual exploitation.
I am also a survivor of sex trafficking and leader in this movement to end the epidemic of sex trafficking. So I grew up from a great family, middle class, working family. I graduated high school, college.
We first met Calais 10 years ago, not long after she had escaped from being held captive and under the complete and violent control of a sex trafficker. For a brief time as a single young woman, she met a new man, and a relationship seemed promising. But everything suddenly changed. He began threatening her and told Calais she would now be working for him as a prostitute.
Threats were real. The threat to kill my life, to kill my family were real. And then he demonstrated those threats by violently beating me. He would send me to different states, different islands for the purpose of sexual exploitation.
When the Super Bowl was in Miami, Calais was trafficked there to work. A tip led to her trafficker's arrest and conviction, and she was finally free. Calais has found her life's purpose at the Missing Child Center. She shares the hope of other providers that with proper guidance, high-risk children will make better decisions about their lives, that they will choose their friends wisely, Children must also recognize that decisions they make in their teenage years can set the course, for good or for bad, for the rest of their lives.
I vowed over 10 years ago to do everything I can to ensure that nothing like that will ever have to happen to anyone.
Kavai's nightmare soon got much worse. Her boyfriend, now sex trafficker, held her captive in a rundown house and regularly sold her for sex.
It was just constant drug making, drug weighing, other random girls in the house. It was such a broken down house. It stunk all the time.
Claire Connors is the United States Attorney for the District of Hawaii.
They're into isolation because if they can isolate you, then they can do the kind of harm that we're all trying to protect you from. What we're seeing now is what's called survival sex. If you want food, if you want shelter, if you want to be safe and live in this tent, you have to exchange that for sex.
So, sex partners all day, money going to, and you didn't get a penny.
No. All I got was weed whenever he gave it to me.
Did he ever starve you so that you would be compliant and have sex?
Yeah. I wouldn't get any food, but or if I said I'm thirsty, like I want water, this and that, he would only give me alcohol.
And in a typical day, how many men were you having sex with?
I would say about 3 to 5. It just ranged and depended on, I guess, clientele that day.
Angela drifted from state to state, made to prostitute herself, getting deeper into drugs and suffering more and more abuse.
Once I hit a certain age, at like 16, 17, I was genuinely about the hustle. I didn't care about anything anymore.
At 20 years old, Angela's downward spiral continued. It nearly cost her life. A potential John had propositioned her. Angela says she had a bad feeling about him and was attempting to walk away. That's when she heard a shot ring out.
That's when I finally feel the stinging and burning, and I realized this man just shot me. This man just shot me. And so that's at that point, like, I'm running. I'm feeling like it's just a weird feeling I get, like it feels hot, clammy, sweaty, like I feel my stomach's pouring out. I'm holding my stomach, I'm trying to run. That's when I felt the third shot. It finally got me in my back right here. It was basically my last time, and that's what really changed my life, was when they really tried to take my life, and I thought it was the ending for me. Then I was like, no, this isn't what I want. So it's like it takes that life and death to open up your eyes, and you're like, no, I'm gonna change. And that's what happened to me.
Sex traffickers sell their victims in many ways in Hawaii. We were told these sales have included late-night, amateur pop-up car shows in parking lots.
I was his display, and I would be in front of the car, and basically I would get bidded on. And that's how he would make his more clientele and more money, because they'd be like, oh, I'll give you this much to be with her for this long.
As the days passed and Kavai didn't return home, Kavai's biological mother, Anela, and Anela's wife, Bea, realized that Kavai might be in deeper trouble than they had first thought.
When my friend had talked to me, he told me that that's what happens when children are missing for more than a couple weeks. He said they go into sex trafficking, and I said, what is that? I had no idea.
The women began an aggressive search for Kavai. They put up posters and used the internet to ask for tips about their missing daughter.
We made a map of all of Waikiki, and we used our island in our kitchen, and we would use Post-its, and we'd post it, and each time we got a tip.
They began actively searching for Kavai. They would stake out locations known to be areas of trafficking, sometimes wearing disguises so traffickers wouldn't recognize them. Often, they told us, they were threatened by pimps.
We'd leave the house about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, We get home about 7 in the morning, and we were watching pimps actually moving children from cars to buildings to places, and people on the street, they knew which ones were moving the children.
The search grew desperate, but then a boy the family knew texted saying he knew where Kavai was and wanting to know if there was a reward. The FBI tracked his cell phone, and Kavai was finally rescued.
So when we saw her and she came out of the police room, that's what I did. And she held on to me so tightly, and she was so skinny.
She was unrecognizable. She was so skinny. She had dark hair, colored eyes, and her eyebrows were like plucked in a different way. She's like unrecognizable.
What did she tell you?
Nothing. She just cried. We just all cried.
Yeah.
For victims brave enough to break the chains of trafficking, the Susanna Wesley Community Center is there for guidance and support. The center was established in Hawaii more than a century ago.
Our first endeavor, our efforts were focused on the immigrant population that were forced into labor and sex trafficking in Hawaii. But more recently, within the last 8 to 9 years, we have shifted our focus into domestic human trafficking. But unfortunately, with this shift, the sad part is it started to uncover the realities of the commercial sexual exploitation of children.
What are the ages that you're finding kids come in?
Well, the age ranges that we've seen have been ranging from 6 to in their 50s. So there is a broad range. A common age, a vulnerable age of being first trafficked is about 12 years old. So can you imagine that, being a parent and just thinking of that potential of your child being victimized at 12?
Susanna Wesley is the gold standard of service providers here in our state. Susanna Wesley is literally the boots on the ground, rapid response. Wherever, whenever a victim needs help, Susanna Wesley is there.
It is no exaggeration to describe their mission as extremely dangerous, with staffers on the street putting themselves at high personal risk in trying to locate and rescue children held captive and sold for sex.
So when we send out our staff to meet with them, we prepare them with what we call hope bags that has clothing, some basic toiletries for hygiene, and just so it's a starter kit for them as they get into their next level of help. As you can imagine, when a victim is seeking help, being rescued, there is fear of detection from their traffickers as they seek help. They're hungry. Oftentimes they're just coming to us with the clothes on their back, which might not be appropriate. And they don't have any support systems, hence they're calling us.
There's been times where I've called caseworkers after an incident has happened and they have came, when it's like, wow, you really put your life on the line and anything. They're like, well, your priority is more important, but I've always known I can rely on them.
We have 85% of our clients successfully completing our program.
If Hawaii's progress in the war against commercial sexual exploitation is measured strictly by the number of convictions of traffickers, the news is not good. In recent years, there have been no convictions at the federal, state, or county level.
And the victims rarely, if ever, report human trafficking. And because of that, it's very difficult for us to move forward and prosecute a case. It's very difficult for us to obtain the evidence that's required to successfully prosecute these cases. These victims are terrified of their traffickers. They don't want to come to court. They don't want to see them in person and talk about all of these terrible things that happen to them.
Did you ever think of testifying against these guys?
I did. So when I first came home, I wanted to, and I was like, yeah, mom, let's do it. Like, they need to go to jail. The cops told my mom there's no evidence. There's not enough evidence. Even when we did the rape kit at Kapiolani, yeah, there was semen, but there's not enough evidence. And so I think it was just too much, and I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't want to have to keep going back to court just to fight for something that I don't know how to prove.
Some survivors don't trust those in positions of authority, including police, making the decision to report more difficult. We were told by more than one person, a small number of police officers who knew these children were being held against their will, never took steps to have them rescued and were instead customers.
So some of the clients you had sex with
Was HPD.
were active duty law enforcement?
Yeah.
Or police officers?
Yeah.
How do you know that?
They had their uniform on.
When they had sex with you?
Yeah. They had uniform on.
Where was that?
Waikiki.
That's pretty messed up, you know. You would think that law enforcement is there to help, but if they're part of that, you know, who can you run to for help?
I have heard that as well in speaking with victims, and when I hear that, it's very disappointing to hear that. And I can't stress enough the importance of exposing anyone who is engaging in this type of criminal activity. It doesn't matter if it's a police officer, if it's a teacher, if it's someone at church or a parent.
To measure success in the fight against commercial sexual exploitation only by convictions is an unrealistic scorecard. It is also unfair to those leading the effort to rid Hawaii of the nightmare of sexual slavery. It is a uniquely difficult crime to prosecute.
Because prosecuting these cases successfully require cooperation of victims or proactive investigations, which we're working towards at this point. As a task force, our first and foremost goal is to have victims identified. Because if victims are identified and they can get help, that's a success. Each person that steps out of the game and receives services and is able to move forward and have a successful, happy, safe life, that's a success.
Although the prosecution's scorecard may be empty, significant changes in Hawaii law have recently been made, changes that are encouraging for the future.
Are we toward first base? We're not rounding third in this issue, but where are we? To use a baseball metaphor.
To use a baseball metaphor, we're in the game. So it's hard to know where the score is because every victim is a person, every victim is somebody that all these resources need to be devoted towards helping in whatever way possible. We were able to create laws that are really unique across the country.
These changes, guided by U.S. Attorney Connors while she was State Attorney General, include increasing the level of offense for the commercial exploitation of children to a Class B felony, eliminating the statute of limitations for prosecutions, and criminalizing the exchange of anything of value from drugs to housing for sex.
When you have a victim who comes into the system, everything has to happen at once. The investigation as well as the provision of victim services, and that takes a lot of coordination. So I do think we're going to get there. The message to the people who are engaging in this activity is we're actively looking for you.
Many young survivors, even though rescued, remain traumatized with lingering psychological damage.
For girls like me, I've been involved in this since 13 years old. You reach a certain age where you're like, man, this is all I have for me. There's no man's gonna want me after this, no husband. Like you feel so damaged by men just purchasing you. You can't even look at men the same.
And my mom saved me because without her, I don't think that, one, I would even be here today, or two, that even if I did get out, that I probably would have went right back in because I wouldn't know how to live life or how to deal with my emotions.
The biggest thing I learned in this whole situation is to not be as strict as a parent. Have a very good open relationship like we do now, because we didn't have one.
Just be aware of what's going on, you know, with your Kiki. If your child has a phone or a laptop, monitor your child's social media. Talk to your kids. You know, talk to them. Let them know that you care.
Best advice to parents is be educated and be willing to potentially upset your children a little bit by asking to see their phones, monitoring their the social media applications.
My message to parents would be to just be aware, to educate yourself on the issue, what's happening in the community around you, in the area that you live, in your children's school. What activities are they involved with? Who is involved in their life? And just be aware of who they're speaking with via text message, via social media, on the internet.
We will not arrest our way out of commercial sexual exploitation. And while law enforcement struggles to build and prosecute cases, we believe this: the crime of sexual exploitation will be reduced or eliminated on the strength of education. Our community must first become aware of the existence and then the extent of this tragedy. Then the mission for all of us is to locate and identify those at high risk or already in the hands of traffickers. They are mostly just children, and we must use every resource available to guide them away from danger to a safe and promising future. Thank you for joining us. I'm Matt Levi. Good night.
I think it's our community duty to be watchful, you know, to keep our children and individuals within our community safe. So if you do see suspicion, please call the hotline.
If you or someone you know is in immediate danger or a victim of sex trafficking, call 911. Susanna Wesley Human Trafficking Crisis Hotline, 808-721-9614, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for suspected or confirmed trafficking. If you have suspicions that a child is being trafficked for sex, do not hesitate to call Child Welfare Services at 808-832-1999 on Oahu or 888-398-1188 on the neighbor islands.
Matt Levi Investigates, brought to you in the public interest without commercial interruption by the Hawaii Community Foundation, supporter of the Susanna Wesley Community Center, and other essential service providers. Hawaiian Electric, caring for our communities for over a century. The Hawaii Government Employees Association, working together for Hawaii. And by Central Pacific Bank, where people like banking.